creates questions the human mind cannot answer. Out of reach, past all we can see, hear, and touch, beyond all we understand, lies the extraordinary. The extraordinary is the invisible visitor who drove the Dupre family from their remote home in the French countryside.
When I arrived at Mr. and Mrs. Dupre's house, I immediately felt something very troubling. I had a very strong sense that there were forces inside the house trying to harm me. Spirits can be very powerful.
He shook the walls, made beds rock, and violently rattled a cupboard, even after it was pulled apart. It is the secret folder comedian Phyllis Diller keeps locked in her closet. She calls it the creepy file.
As my secretary walked past the cage, he said, "Don't go to the airport." And she freaked. She really wanted to cancel the trip. And when we got there, believe me, it was one of the worst flights that we've ever had. It was 2 hours late, and then they had mechanical trouble. It was one of those days, and he never said it before or since.
The extraordinary is the highly educated doctor from Yale University who has no doubt he has lived before.
It was as if a huge hand had reached down and changed my life forever, because I knew that we weren't limited to our bodies then. This was very strange to me.
It is the curse that surrounds this dark Shakespearean play. A play whose name actors refuse to say.
The facts of the matter are that more people have died performing this play than any other play ever written.
The extraordinary is a ghost that visited Edna Burt in her home. A ghost that appeared in a painting she gave her husband.
But when you're painting and you feel it needs something, you do something. There was no intention on my part to put a ghost into it, but apparently that's the way it's turned out.
Just some of the stories that lie beyond our normal understanding. Tonight on The Extraordinary.
The image in that painting is quite eerie. Good evening. I'm Warwick Moss. After midnight, when the air outside is still and the day noises have long since faded into silence, that is the time that things go bump in the night. For the Dupre family of a remote farming village in France, they didn't go bump so much as they went wallop. Strange things happened that were witnessed by too many to be imagined, and they almost drove a whole family crazy.
It happened here, a few kilometers from the town of Lisieux in the province of Normandy. It became known throughout as the Lisieux Horror, France's own terrifying version of the American Amityville Horror. And before it was over, the Dupre family had tried priests, psychiatrists, and the most famous exorcist in the country in their desperate efforts to rid their home of a poltergeist. It rattled cabinets, made noises, caused the apparition of a strange man, made fruit fly through the air and through a closed door. When the assembled men tore apart the cabinet that rocked and slammed its own door and left it in pieces on the floor, the wooden planks continued to vibrate. To this day, Mr. Dupre has trouble believing what happened to him the week of the Lisieux Horror.
If someone had told me, I would have laughed, because, well, even now, I have a hard time believing it. I do only because I lived it, but otherwise...
The Dupres had lived a peaceful, uneventful life in their cottage for more than a decade before it was turned upside down on a calm Sunday afternoon in autumn.
Hello. Could you please bring me my pruning scissors?
Where are they?
I don't know.
It was shortly after nightfall when the Dupreys heard a knock on their door. It surprised them because their house was isolated in the Norman countryside, and they rarely got unexpected visitors. When no one was at the door, it unnerved the Dupreys. They became more alarmed when they saw the front gate was still locked. Someone would have had to come through the gate to reach the door.
What's going on? Nothing.
They are not broken.
I don't understand.
But worse was to happen before the night was through. After they went to bed, the knocking started in the attic. They were certain someone was in their house.
What is it?
There's nothing. Come on, let's go to bed.
The knocks got louder, and Mrs. Duprey couldn't take it anymore. She called her sister-in-law, who thought she was coming over to calm an overactive imagination.
What's wrong? What's the matter?
Quand je suis arrivée, ma belle-sœur était complètement effondrée.
When I arrived, my sister-in-law was completely distraught. She was even crying. I told her, no, it's your imagination. There's nothing unusual. There couldn't have been noises like that. It's absolutely impossible. I stayed there to calm her, and after a little while, only 10 or 15 minutes, I began to hear noises. Noises like someone throwing gravel at a window, for example. It's terrifying to hear and see all those things and not be able to tell where they're coming from.
They made it through the night, but the next day, both women refused to stay in the house unless the rest of the men in the family came and stayed there. So the Dupreys, 2 brothers and a sister, joined the group.
It's moving by itself. Should we do? Oh, my God.
That evening, we heard a noise of doors that were banging. We saw the doors of the armoire open and close themselves. The men watched as it continued to undo itself, and the 3 of them decided to take the armoire apart and break it into pieces.
Be careful, it could be dangerous.
I think we should take it apart.
Yes, that would be the best thing to do. Now it won't move.
Let's hope not.
Let's go.
When we went back up there, we saw the boards rising. They were in essence banging, just heaving. And then they closed the door to the bedroom, saying that we shouldn't go in that room anymore because really, we were really afraid.
More of the Dupreys family came to stay at the house, each new arrival skeptical until he arrived. The newer arrivals were treated to a bizarre flying apple show that left the entire family in shock and ready to move out.
We all saw the apples. They came from the attic and passed through the door, making a black spot. Then they flew to the room next door.
We didn't want to talk about it because we told ourselves people would say that we're crazy, that the whole family's crazy. When we touched one of the apples, it was hot. It felt very hot.
Within a few nights, Mr. and Mrs. Duprey and their families could take it no more. They moved out for the rest of the week, too frightened to go home. The house was peaceful again at first, but the next time Mrs. Duprey's sister-in-law visited, an even stranger vision appeared.
Un matin, qu'est-ce que je vois? Un homme.
One morning, I saw the image of a man exit the bedroom. He appeared before me in the hall. I was afraid, very, very afraid. He put his hand on the door of the bedroom and suddenly disappeared. That upset me. It was the first time I had seen anything like that, and though I didn't believe in ghosts, I could not explain what I saw.
Strange disruptions and noises tormented the Dupreys for the next 2 months, and finally, in desperation, when psychological counseling and religious blessings failed to halt their nightmare, they turned to a locally renowned exorcist, Michel Royer.
When I arrived at Mr. and Mrs. Dupre's house, I immediately felt something very troubling. I had a very strong sense that there were forces inside the house trying to harm me. Spirits can be very powerful. They're very clever, very strong.
It's happening. The bed's moving again. When you lie down, it moves. It rises by itself.
With the three Dupre brothers looking on, Michel Royer seemed to summon a strength to quell whatever forces seemed to be inside the bed. Later that day, he performed an exorcism ritual in every room of the house. And the Dupres say they never again saw or heard any abnormal events in their home.
Her laugh is heard around the world. It's hard to have a conversation with her without getting a punchline at the end of every sentence. In public, she sends out the message that life is a joke. Every floor is a stage, and people are there to be entertained. I think you'll recognize the lady in question.
Think of me as a white Tina Turner. No, think of me as a sex symbol for men who just don't give a damn.
Phyllis Diller has brought her bag full of one-liners to Australia on several occasions, and over the years she's been a regular in Bob Hope's specials and movies. These days, she's the matriarch of American stand-up comedy. But behind the act, there's a more spiritual Miss Diller. You have to scratch hard to find it, but inside Phyllis lies a deep awareness of the unexplained. When we called on her in Hollywood, Phyllis revealed her collection of stories that she keeps locked in her bureau drawer. So come with us now into the folder where Phyllis keeps what she calls the creepy file. Phyllis's parrot, Polly, occupies a lot of space in the creepy file. And this is just one of his psychic flashes. The day Phyllis was about to get on a plane.
As my secretary walked past the cage, he said, "Don't go to the airport." And she freaked. She really wanted to cancel the trip. I said, "Teresa, we can't cancel the trip. We've got to go. The show must go on. We can't listen to a parrot. He can't run our lives." And when we got there, believe me, it was one of the worst flights that we've ever had. It was 2 hours late, and then they had mechanical trouble. It was one of those days. And he never said it before or since.
Then there was the day a strange voice told Phyllis to buy a flashlight.
And the next night was the biggest, blackest blackout in New York, and you don't know dark till you've been in New York in a blackout. Believe me, you can be in an apartment that you think you know, and you can't even find a wall, except that I had my flashlight.
There was the practical joker at the Kentucky Derby, who thought he could shock Phyllis by pulling a giant pocket watch out of the front of his trousers. Phyllis had the perfect answer.
A cute old guy, and he stood up and opened his fly and pulled out one of those huge, big watches. Have you ever seen them? The great big watch. It was his joke, and it was on a chain. I reached into my bag and pulled out the same watch.
Phyllis also has a file on the day she was at a radio station, and for no apparent reason, the DJ started talking about kumquats.
Because you seldom hear the word kumquat. And he used the word kumquat. I said, would you believe I have a kumquat in my purse? I took out a kumquat because I just happened to have a kumquat tree at that time, and I don't know why I had it in the purse. I must have known that he was going to say kumquat.
Then there was the night Dinah Shaw came to Phyllis in a dream. Oddly enough, Dinah was in a flower shop.
Why she would be in a flower shop, I have no idea. I hadn't seen Dinah for so long. I hadn't thought about her. I hadn't been on her show, and I hadn't seen her show. And that afternoon, I received a box of flowers from Dinah.
And finally, from the creepy file, the day Phyllis might have died in agony under the chassis of a Rolls-Royce. A TV director insisted Phyllis roll herself under the car.
I have never walked off a set in my life, except once, and this was the once. He wanted me to get drunk and do it. He said, what do you drink? Vodka? And I said, look, nothing will get me under this car. I said, you figure out how you're going to get around this scene. And I walked to my cottage. We had, I had a cottage for a dressing room. And while I was in there, this huge, heavy car that was up, not on wheels, not on its own wheels, but on apple boxes. Those are only wooden boxes that they use on television and movie sets to put things at a proper height. The car collapsed. That would have been the end of my life. All you have in life is time. That is it. Because, see, I don't think I'm coming back. In fact, I know I'm not. Anyway, I'm trying to do as much as I can with this life. Therefore, I try to be organized. That's why I have a creepy file.
Ever had the feeling you've lived before? Most of us have experienced déjà vu, or imagined a time and place that seems more familiar than it should. And I guess only a certain number of us actually believe in reincarnation, that we've lived before in a different century or body. Usually, the people who are convinced they had previous lives are, well, the impressionable type. Yet this incident comes from a highly educated doctor from Yale University.
She is a woman who lived 4,000 years ago, drowning in a cruel sea when her baby is dragged from her arms.
Oh, my baby. My baby.
Then she is 3 years old in this life, recoiling from the drunken hands of her own father.
Putting his hand over my mouth.
Then she is a Greek woman in 2600 BC, then a Spanish prostitute in 1700 AD. But when Catherine becomes an unnamed woman suffering a heart attack while crossing a bridge in the Middle Ages, it is this story of reincarnation that has changed the life of a most unlikely man. He is Dr. Brian Weiss. Today, he is an absolute believer in the fact that we all have lived before, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of other lives.
We are immortal. We are eternal. We don't die when our bodies die.
Dr. Weiss isn't your average reincarnation buff. He's an eminent professor of psychiatry from Yale University Medical School, chairman of the psychiatry department at the University of Miami's Mount Sinai Medical Center. Even he finds his conversion unlikely.
This new stuff, parapsychology, right-brained, or the illogical, non-linear, this was something alien to me. I did not believe in any of it. Very skeptical.
That was until he met the lab technician named Catherine, an attractive woman in her early 30s.
She was complaining of panic attacks, phobias, depression, recurrent nightmares. She was sleeping in a walk-in closet in her house and couldn't function. She came to me. I would normally have treated her with medicines, antidepressants for these panic attack and depression symptoms. But she refused. She had a lifelong fear of gagging, and she refused to take any medicine. I wanted to use hypnosis. She resisted. She was afraid of giving up control, but finally she agreed, and I used hypnosis to bring her back to her childhood, and we did find very traumatic episodes.
How old are you, Catherine?
I'm 3.
The worst was when she was molested by her father, who was an alcoholic merchant sailor.
I hear somebody coming.
Do you know who it is?
It's my daddy.
Are you frightened?
And he held his large hand over her mouth. In my office, many years later, she was gagging and choking me.
Believing he had a clue to her phobias, Dr. Weiss hypnotized Catherine again the next week, but was not prepared for a sudden, dramatic quantum leap.
And I told her, go back to the time from which your symptoms first arise, thinking that she'd go back to 2.5 or 2 3/4. But instead, she just flipped back about 4,000 years into some ancient Near Eastern lifetime.
I'm in Egypt.
You're in Egypt?
Although I was thinking this is imagination or fantasy, I had never heard of this before. How could this be happening? She went through this life in a different body, different face, different hair, different name, drowning in a flood or tidal wave, her baby being torn from her arms by the force of the water.
My baby!
She had 2 other lifetimes, although I was still very skeptical. As a Greek woman a few hundred years later, and as a Spanish prostitute in the 1700s. Amazingly, even though I didn't believe this, her symptoms started getting better right away. Her lifelong fear of gagging was nearly obliterated just by this one session. And that was the beginning for me. That was my turnaround, at least the start of it. After the first session, I was confused because I had great difficulty accepting this as what it seems to be. Past lifetimes, reincarnation. I didn't believe in any of this. On the other hand, why was she getting better?
And then, in the 5th session of Catherine's regression therapy, it happened.
So I put her under, and I remember she went through a Middle Ages lifetime, dying of a heart attack on a bridge centuries ago. And then she floated above her body. Now, she had been doing this for the past few weeks, so I was not surprised by this part. And she went up and found this beautiful light, such as the near-death experience researchers write about.
The light. It's beautiful. There are 2 people here to see you. Your father, Avram, and your son.
I remember the room feeling icy cold. We were the only 2 people in the room. My secretary was in an outer office. And I'm sure the thermostat hadn't changed, but I was feeling very cold. And she said, your father says his name is Avram. That's how she pronounced it. She's a Catholic woman from New England. Nobody knew this information.
In a few moments, the woman Catherine would reveal intimate details of his infant son's death. She knew his daughter's name and the circumstances of his father's death.
He died from his heart. Your daughter is named after him. Your little son is here. He's shining very brightly. He died because his heart was backwards, like a chicken.
My first child, a son, had died at 23 days of age of a very rare congenital heart defect, something called total anomalous pulmonary venous drainage. Basically what that is, the blood vessels are coming in the wrong side of the heart, so it's as if it were turned around, and she knew this. It was as if a huge hand had reached down and changed my life forever, because I knew that we weren't limited to our bodies then. This was very strange to me, that my whole linear, rational world, the black and white world, the 2-dimensional world, the ego world, was going to change and change forever, because she was accessing knowledge, information that she could not. And if this were true, then perhaps what she was telling me about past lifetimes was also true.
The theater
is full of tales of mystery, intrigue, and the abnormal. There's the 1946 story of Robert Jackson, a movie theatre announcer, and the night he was working live on the film The Light That Failed. During the screening, 5 gunshots rang out in the film, but no one noticed the sound of a 6th shot, a real bullet that murdered Jackson. 47 years later, in 1993, a man told police he knew who did the killing, his father and a friend, both of whom were now dead. And then there's the story of the Shakespearean play, some say is cursed.
I have no words. My voice is in my sword. Now bloody a villain than terms can give thee out.
The facts of the matter are that more people have died performing this play than any other play ever written. More horrendous things have happened while it's been performed than any other play ever written. And it is universally regarded in the theatre as being a cursed play.
Many actors believe there is something evil in the play itself. They will not refer to it by name, refuse to utter that single word in a theatre, and never rehearse the final line until opening night.
You see, her eyes are open.
Aye, but their senses are shut.
A cursed play, something evil. What harmless piece of theatre could arouse such suspicion and superstition? Well, it's by Shakespeare. It's one of his tragedies. And I suppose because this is television and not theatre, I can actually utter the dreaded word. It's Macbeth.
It's always referred to as the Scottish play. Some people call it the Scottish comedy, some people call it the Scottish tragedy, some people call it Billy Connolly. It has a wide variety of names, but never mention the name in or around a theatre.
David McSwan has directed that Scottish play 5 times so far.
I'm certainly not here to say that the devil's at work or that the devil isn't at work. I don't really know. But all my friends and myself who've ever worked on this play can certainly regale you with a load of stories of things that go bizarrely wrong at the last minute.
Just take the first time he attempted to translate the bard's Scottish saga to the stage.
It started in a small way. I sprained an ankle, and I thought nothing of that. I'd laughed at the curse, you know. I thought, oh, no, that's superstitious nonsense. Then I lost my job, my day job, which I was doing to fund directing at night. Then I had a car crash and got severe whiplash. Then my relationship broke up, and then I was kicked out of my flat. So then I began to think there's something about this that might be true.
One theory is that Shakespeare was actually meddling with real witches' curses. So when he uses lines like thrice to thine and thrice to mine and thrice again to make up 9, and the famous double, double, toil and trouble, he's actually using witches' incantations that were well known at the time, but you never said them out loud. And to use them on stage deliberately is playing with the forces of darkness.
Double, double, toil and trouble, fire and cauldron double.
Actors are superstitious folk, and of all the plays in the complete works of Shakespeare, this one is guaranteed to send them searching for their good luck charms. Some manage to shrug off the curse, like Australia's most distinguished Shakespearean actor, John Bell.
Well, I've been involved with quite a few productions of Macbeth over the years. I've directed it once, I've played it once, I'm about to do it again. But I was in a production at the Royal Shakespeare Theatre in Stratford-on-Avon in 1965. Peter Hall's production with Paul Schofield. It turned out okay in the end, but we had some troublesome times during it. The worst problem was that the director, Peter Hall, got shingles during rehearsal, and we had to have 9 weeks break while he recovered. So he had to put another show on quickly in its place. And of course everyone said, oh, well, that's the Macbeth curse. In fact, I'm sure it was an overload of anxiety and hard work and, you know, scrounging for money, all those things that directors of companies have to do. Nevertheless, it was sheeted home to the Macbeth curse.
Another skeptic was Michael Salmon, until he found himself as production manager for that play. It was an absolute horror. Drama off stage and on.
One particular night, one of the patrons had a heart attack and we had to stop the show to get a patron out, which is the first time that has happened in the history of the theatre. It was an extraordinary production, and the interesting thing is that no one in the cast or no one in the administration actually thought that there was any credence in this myth that surrounds the Scottish play. But I can assure you, at the end of the production, we'd all changed our minds.
There's asked and I cursed in the calendar.
I was reading recently that the RSC was doing a production of Macbeth, the Royal Shakespeare Company, and they got a priest in to bless the entire cast. That was the degree of the terror that they had when they're doing it.
A play first produced in 1605 or 1606 about a political power struggle and a gruesome murder in Scotland. A fiction that's mesmerised audiences, but terrified actors and directors for almost 4 centuries.
I respect the tradition of not mentioning the name, because the mere mention of the name brings bad luck, but also because I think it's out of respect for other people who really do believe it. And I've worked with a couple of actors who I've seen go quite white, and their whole performance has been completely destroyed by somebody carelessly mentioning it, even just in conversation.
I don't think that actors and directors these days worry too much about the Macbeth curse. We can't afford to pay deference to that kind of superstition anymore, I think. But we do worry about safety precautions, for instance, with costumes and weapons and that sort of stuff, to make sure that they're safe. If there's going to be stage machinery involved for various apparitions and witchcraft and so on happening, to make sure it's foolproof, because sure as eggs, if anything goes wrong, people are going to say, well, you shouldn't have done that play, it was bad luck to take it on in the first place.
Bloody villain than terms can give thee.
Nevertheless, they just can't help themselves. Curse or no curse, the Scottish play by William Shakespeare keeps appearing on stages all over the world.
It's a bit difficult. I mean, when you're rehearsing that play, you have to mention Macbeth every couple of words, and you can see people on the floor going white with tension. Don't say it, don't say it. But I think you've got to come to a point where you reach a practical compromise and you say, well, what the hell, we're doing the play, we're tempting fate as much as we can in any case, so in for a penny, in for a pound.
Edna Burt is an average Australian, living an average life. She was married for many years, but now lives alone with her memories. One of those memories is very special and quite unique. You see, Edna was often visited by a ghost that eventually made a very strange appearance for all to see. It's late one night in the 60s, a comfortable but unpretentious home in the suburbs of Sydney. Edna Burt has trouble sleeping, so she's passing time sewing in the dining room. Her husband Jim and 2 daughters are sound asleep. After a while, Edna has a strange feeling. She senses she's not alone in the room. There's someone standing in the dining room doorway. At first, quite naturally, she assumes it's Jim.
It wasn't him standing there at all. It was a tallish female figure in a very loose type of frock, I suppose it would have been, of an indescribable colour, a yellowish, creamy colour. And I felt that she was very happy to see me there. And several times in the next few years, I had the same experience with the same figure. She just stood there, really, in the doorway. She was quite relaxed, and I felt that somehow or other I was doing the right thing.
For almost 30 years, Edna has wondered about that mysterious woman. She doesn't think of her as a ghost, more a friend from another time.
I found later that the house, the block that the house was on, was part of a grant of land that had been made in 1810 to Captain Wiltshire by Governor Macquarie. And this was part of that land. At the back of the house, of my house, was a very big old house that had been added on to over the years and altered. And I felt myself, this figure was so obviously approving of me sitting sewing that possibly just the area where I sat was probably the person's favourite part in that garden, because it would have been a big garden.
It was a garden that a century and a half later, Jim Burt tended lovingly. So in 1971, when Edna and Bert were about to celebrate their 25th wedding anniversary, Edna decided that this special occasion in their lives had to be marked by a special gift. She spoke to her brother, Alan Waite, a noted Sydney painter. The special gift was to be a portrait of Jim with his favourite rhododendron bush.
I asked Alan if he would paint it, and he came, and when he saw it and saw how beautiful it was, he decided that he would try anyway, although he hadn't painted any still life for many years at that stage. And when he was painting it, he asked Jim to sit on the brickwork, which he did, and this tiny little portrait of my husband side on is there, and it's very much like him, and that was that.
This was Alan Waite's painting, the giant, glorious rhododendron in full bloom. A figure in the foreground that's definitely Jim Burt. But there was an added touch, as the guests discovered at the official unveiling.
When the night came for the big party, Alan came in with the parcel, and when we opened it, of course, the friends that were there said, "Oh, how beautiful it was. What a lovely portrait of Jim, but who was the other figure? It didn't look like me." And Alan just said, "Well, it was never meant to be Edna," and that was all that was ever said.
Perhaps it was just a stroke of artistic licence as Alan Waite worked at his easel. Perhaps it was something more. You see, the woman in the portrait bears a remarkable resemblance to that lady from the past who appeared so regularly at the dining room door.
The figure in the portrait appears to have a sash or something, or a dark something round the waistline, where the times that I saw it, it was just a loose garment, but otherwise it's the same figure and it's the same garment.
For almost 20 years, Alan Waite went on painting and teaching, unaware of this coincidence. Then, in 1991, his sister told him the story of the visitor and her unexpected appearance in his painting. It was the first time since the anniversary party that she'd mentioned it to anyone.
Well, I already had the man sitting there on the balcony, and I just felt that it needed another figure just to support that. It needed some sense of family in the place, perhaps. It's a difficult thing to say, but when you're painting and you feel it needs something, you do something. There was no intention on my part to put a ghost into it, but apparently that's the way it's turned out.
It was here in this Sydney home that Edna Burt came face to face with the apparition. She thought she was the only one to see the ghostly image. She was wrong. It just so happens there's one more character in this story, a Springer Spaniel called Pete, a companion Jim bought for his wife just before he died.
Springers, as you know, are gentle, very intelligent dogs. And he always slept at my husband's feet or lay there of a night. And after my husband died, Pete was over there near the usual spot one night and he became very agitated. And he wasn't allowed to bark in the house, so he came over to me and indicated that he wasn't happy. I calmed him down for a while and then eventually he went, and instead of going back to that place, he went and lay across the doorway that led into the hallway.
The doorway, in fact, where the lady had always appeared. Edna's now convinced that Pete sensed there was a stranger in the house, a stranger who called in every now and then. And, more by instinct than by training, it was his job to protect Edna from any intruder. An intruder from the present, or one from the past.
It had occurred to me that I hadn't seen the figure, as I thought, from the time that we acquired the dog. But I think the dog was there and kept the figure from coming in to me in the lounge room, because you couldn't see directly into the lounge or out of the lounge room because of the angle of the door. So to my way of thinking, the figure did come again on a number of occasions, because again Pete would be distressed, not exactly distressed, but telling me there was something wrong or something different.
'50s, an event took place that you are going to find hard to believe. A single-engine plane took off from Sydney's Bankstown Airport. It circled the city for more than 2 hours, and it created panic on the streets. You see, this plane had no pilot. In fact, there was no one on board. Good night. See you in the future.
It's a story that if I wrote this story and took it to an editor, he would throw me into the street, and he would have every right to.